Okay, Tov. Today's daf is daf Nun Ches, and we're describing the terrible catastrophe at Beitar. And on the bottom of Nun Zayin Omid Beis, Omer Rabba Bar Bachana, Omer Rav Yochanan Arboim Sak Tzutzei Tefillin, Nimtzu Beroshe Haruge Beisar. The Gemara is trying to dramatize the catastrophe of Beitar by telling us how many tefillin, let's say tefillin shel rosh, we'll see later on the Gemara is going to differentiate between shel rosh and shel yad, were found on the bodies of those who were murdered in Beitar. So we're talking about a number which is called Arboim Sa'ah. Rabbi Yanai Rabbi Yishmael Amar Shalosh Kupos Shal Arboim Sa'ah. So it's not just Arboim Sa'ah, but there were kupos that had within them batei tefillin that were collected from the corpses in 3 kupos. Each kupa had Arboim Sa'ah. So you're talking about a total volume, or shall we say weight, of 120 sa'ah, which is 3 times 40. But Masechet Tana, then we have a brisa that says Arboim kupos. There were 40 kupos of batei tefillin, shel shalosh se'in. Each one of these kupos had the weight of 3 sa'ah. So even according to the brisa that we just quoted from Masechet Tana, the mishkal, the weight of each one of these kupos together, was 120 sa'ah. And this all seems to contradict what we saw in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that it's 40 sa'ah batei tefillin on the heads of the Harugei Beitar. So Gemara says lo pligi, the brisa and Rabbi Yanai, who said that it was 120 sa'ah of batei tefillin, did not exclude or contradict Rabbi Yochanan's 40 sa'ah of batei tefillin b'rosh Harugei Beitar, because the brisa and Rabbi Yanai are the reisha of the tefillin shel rosh, which are very large. And the reason why the tefillin shel rosh are relatively large is because each of the 4 parshios is written on a separate klaf, and they take these 4 klafim and they put into 4 batim. So the 4 batim in tefillin shel yad, all 4 parshios are written on 1 klaf, and they put it into 1 single bias. And since the tefillin shel rosh has 4 batim, therefore there's even a revach between each bias and bias. So that gives you an expanded shel rosh. But Rabbi Yochanan is referring to the dara. Dara means tefillin shel yad, and they're relatively small because they're written on 1 klaf and put into 1 single bias. There's no separation. So therefore, if you're looking at tefillin shel rosh, you're going to end up with a smaller kamus, and that's Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Asi, arba kabin moach nimtzu al even achas. So they apparently smashed the brains of the Harugei Beisar on a rock. And Rabbi Yomi is telling us very dramatically and graphically, I should say, about the volumes of brains. Ula Omar Tisha Kabin, more than twice that amount. I remember on Tisha B'Av, Rav Soloveitchik used to always talk about how the Nazis had special pleasure in killing children, and very often they would take a child and just smash his brain against the wall, so the blood would drip down. That this is the nature of our enemies. Omer Rav Kahana Vitema Shila Bar Mori, Maikra, which pasuk, with regard to the Bavliim, that means the Churban Bayis Rishon, intimates this whole story. And the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Tilim Kuf Lamed Zayin, Bas Bavel Hashduda Ashrei sheyishalem loch es gmulech shegamalt. So David HaMelech is actually cursing the Bnei Bavel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bring about a punishment and retribution against them because of their terrible actions against the Jewish nation during the Churban period. And the pasuk continues and says, Ashrei sheyoches v'nipetz es olalayich el hasola. Now, I'm not sure I understand exactly the meaning of the word ashrei in this context, but v'nipetz es olalayich is referring to splitting the brains of these young children, olalayich are bnei badim ketanim al sela, on a rock. So I think, I'm just going to take a stab at it, that the word ashrei in this context refers to the punishment that's going to be meted out for these terrible, murderous, bloodthirsty actions. Now, in Eicha Perik Daled, Bnei Tzion HaYikarim HaMisuloim Bapaz. Now, the word Misuloim apparently means Mishubachim, and Paz refers to gold. So the Gemara asks, "My misuloim v'paz." Where's the shevach of paz? We don't see any indication that mishubachim b'paz. So the Gemara interprets this pasuk as if it said mi paz, not b'paz, but more than paz. That Klal Yisrael are more praiseworthy than Paz. And the Gemara is now asking, where is that? Where do we see that? If you're going to tell me that Klal Yisrael were ornated with jewels of gold, of Paz, and that's how we see their shevach, their value. V'amar debei Rabbi Shilo, we have a statement from the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Shilo, that tarti maskele istire pisa nochus bialma. That in fact, it wasn't the Jewish nation that really took over the Paz. There were two weights of sloi paz that came down into this world, v'chada b'Romi, v'chada b'kuli alma, half of which was taken by Rome, and the second selah was divided up in the entire world, so that Rome had what's the word I'm looking for? An exaggerated volume of paz. So you can't say that the pasuk means that Bnei Tzion were unique and specially designated and praised because of the Tachshitei Paz. You could say that about the Romans, but not about the Jewish people. We are not famous for our gold. Ella, but rather shahoyu min meganim es hapaz biyofayim. That if you compare the beauty of Klal Yisrael, and probably the reference here is to inner beauty, to the beauty of Paz, then by far the beauty of Klal Yisrael exceeds that of the beauty of Paz. Now the Gemara is going to tell us stories to indicate how much greater were Bnei Yisrael than Paz. Me'ikara, originally before the Churban, Chashivei Dromoi, there were Chashuvim in Rome, and this is a very painful story as well. They wanted to make sure that women, their wives, would get pregnant with beautiful children. Savinokte Bilyona de Gushpanka. they would grab on to beautiful it's the word I'm looking for. Sorry, Rabbi, I'm having a little trouble today with getting those words that I'm looking for. Sculpture, that's the word I want. So they would look for sculpture of gold that had beautiful tsuros on them. And when they had relations with their wives, these were available. And the process of procreation would imitate those images. But mikan v'elach, after the Churban, when they captured the Jewish people were taken into captive. Again, this is very painful to read this Gemara. Maisu b'nei Yisrael, the Romans would take the Jews that was even more beautiful than these golden busts or sculptures. The asrei b'kari defurayu, they would tie them down to the bedposts. Umishamshe, and they had relations in their presence, and they believed that this would be even more beautiful for the children that would be born, that would be conceived, than even the gold busts. One Jew asked his friend, where do we find in the Torah some sort of an allusion to this low humiliation of the Jewish people? It's alluded to in the Pasuk in Torah Chav Ches. In the Tochacha, it says, Gam kol choli v'chol makash lo kosev b'sefer Torah zos. That in addition to all the diseases and the plagues that will befall the Jewish people, there's more to it that's not even written in the Torah. Something that's a Dovra Maguna, that it can't be even written in the Torah. The Torah couldn't get itself to write such a thing. Omer, he asked him a second time, Kama marchikna miduchta plan. Where am I in my studies of the Torah? How far am I away from that pasuk? Amalei ingad, very small. You're right there almost. Pusta upalga. If you turn 1.5 pages, you'll get to it. Amalei. So the questioner asked him, imitai legabe. If I would have gotten already to that pasuk lo itzrich, I wouldn't have even had to ask you the question. I would understand that this tzara that we just described before was alluded to in this pasuk when it says it can't be written in the Torah. Rabbi Yehuda Meshmul Mishum Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Ma'idich siv, a pasuk in the 3rd chapter of Megillas Eicha. Eini olula lenafshi mikol benos iri. My eyes are distorted because of all the bechi for the benos, the daughters of my city. And Rav Shimon Gamliel is going to dash in this pasuk as if it referred to himself. That of all the tinokos in Beitar at the time of the Churban, he was the only survivor. How many tinokos were there that were destroyed at the time of Beitar, of the Churban of Beitar? Arba meos bati knesias hayu b'krach Beisar. There were 400 synagogues in Beitar. Ubechol achas v'achas hayu ba arba meos malamdi tinokos. In each one of these synagogues, there were 400 Torah teachers for the children. V'kol echad v'echad, and every one of these malamdi tinokos hayu lefanav arba meos tinokos shel beis Rabban. When our enemies broke through to Beitar, the Tinokos rose up against the enemies and started beating them up with rods. Ukshegavar oyev, and when the enemy overcame the people of Beitar, ulechadum, and they took the children, again, very painful Gemara, karchum b'sifreim, they took the very books that they were using to learn with and wrapped them around the children, v'tzitzum b'esh, and they lit them up on fire. Of all those tinokos, so we're talking about untold numbers, only Reb Shimon Gamliel survived. He got to this large metropolis in Rome. There is one child that apparently survived the Holocaust at Beitar, and he's locked up in jail. Yefei Nayim V'Tov Roi, very pleasant look. Ukvutzosov, Sturos Taltalim, his hair is curls. Halach, Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya went to see V'Yomen al Pesach Beis Asurim. He wants to find out if this child is a Chacham. Omar. So he asks in the following question, which is recorded in Yeshaya Membeis, Mi Nosan Lemeshisa Yaakov v'Yisrael lebozazim. Who gave over Yaakov to be trampled upon and the people of Israel to be humiliated? The child knew the next part of the pasuk. Halo Hashem, zu chatanu lo. We have sinned against God, and those sins caused this terrible destruction of the Jewish people. And the pasuk continues that our forefathers did not want to go in the derech Hashem, and they didn't observe his Torah. Now Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya is listening to this child who's reciting a pasuk bal peh from Yeshaya Navi. He probably won the Chidon Tanakh. Omar Muftachani Bo, I'm sure about this child, Shemoro Rabbi Yisrael. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya takes a Shvua Avoda, that's a Lashon Shvua, She'eni Zaz Mikan Ad Shefdenu. I'm not leaving this Beis Asurim until I redeem him. Bechol Moment Shepos Kamelov, whatever money they demand. So here the Rishonim ask, after all, we have a takana here in Masechet Gittin Memhei that ain't podis ashrum yesel kedei demeir. And a lot of answers to this. Tosfos, Dibra Maskal Kol, gives the answer that if there's sakonis nefashos, then will be poder the shevi even yosem midmeir. Ramban is not happy with this Tosfos. He says every shevi is sakonis nefashos. Nevertheless, there was a takana shlo yifti yosem midmeir. And the answer probably is that b'shas churban habayis lo shaychis svar sheyavo hagoyim v'yishbu od Yisrael kedei ligvos mehen. That at the time of the churban, we're not worried about the enticing our enemies to take more captives because they were out to just destroy the Jewish people. Lo hayu yamim muatim. Not too many days passed, Hora Yisrael, till this child was able to be a Moro, Rabbi Manu. Who is he? Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Oh, so I thought it was Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Sorry. Rabbi Yudam Rav Maise bibno bibito Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. This is what Rav Soloveitchik used to always call Velus ala Yachid. We mourn for the tragedy of individuals. So we're talking about the children of Yishmael ben Elisha, who was the Kohen Gadol. So not only was he Mora Rabbi Yisrael, but he was also the Kohen Gadol. And Nishbu L'shnei Adonim. Each one, the boy and the girl, were taken captive to two different captors. Liyamim, Nizdavgu Shneim. These two Adonim, who each had a beautiful, this one had a boy and a girl. They came together. I have an Eved who's so beautiful. Omar once said to the other, let's marry them off and we'll split the children. They'll be beautiful children. And they locked them up together in a room. The son of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol sat in this area, this corner. Vizu and the daughter of Bekeren Vizu. Zeh Omer, the son of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, says, Ani Kohen ben Kohenim Gedolim, Ketzad, how could it be? Esa Shivcha. Now notice he calls his sister a Shivcha because he has no clue that that's his sister. So it was a Shkaga Yotze Mipir, Vizos, and she said, Ani Kohen is Bas Kohenim Gedolim, and Noseli Eved, I'm going to get married to an Eved? Again, she didn't know it was her brother, who was aspiring to all these Kohanim Gedolim. Ubachu kol alayla, came and shola amud hashachar. He kiru zed zeh. Oh no, look what happened. I called my sister a shivcha. I called my brother an Eved. Naflu zel zeh, v'go b'bchia. They realized what they had done by insulting ad sheyotza nishmasa. As a result of excessive crying, they perished. They passed on. Aleim konin Yirmiyo al Eila Nibochia, first parak of Eicha. Eini Yordamai. My eyes, each eye for another child of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. Amrei Shloker Ma'asav Yishachas v'Tzofnas Bas Pniel Shma. Why was she called Sofnas? Shakol Sofim Biyofia. And some of the Rishonim here say that she was so beautiful, but she let people know how beautiful she was. Bas Pniel. Why is she called Bas Pniel? Bito Shel Kohen Gadol Sheshimesh Lifnai V'Lifnim. So the word Pniel indicates the Kodesh Kadoshim. So I guess the Pei Nun of Pniel refers to Pnim. Now, she was taken captive by the Goyim. V'nisal ba hashaboy kol halayla. So the captor violated her the whole night. L'mocher el bisha shiva chalukim. He wrapped her in 7 cloaks. Votzia, and he took her out to the shuk l'mochra to sell her as a shivcha b'adam echad shayim mechor b'yoser, an ugly man. Omar, this ugly man said, "Lo," he said to the captor, "Harenias Yofia, I want to see how beautiful she is." I mean, you wrapped her up with 7 garments. Omalo, so the captor said, Reika, you're an empty person. Imatarotza likach. If you want to marry a beautiful woman, kach. Take this woman. I mean, not to marry her, but to take her as a shiv. She'ein ki yofya b'chol olam kula. There's no one as beautiful. She's Miss Universe. Omalo, the Mechur says, I don't trust you. Afal pichein hifshita. I want to see her beauty. So if Shita Shisha Chalukim, they took 6 out of the garments. Ushvi Karata. She ripped the 7th garment, the inner garment, before they could take it off her. V'nispalsha b'efra, and she jumped into the dirt. Amar Lefarav, she turns to the Ribono Shalom. Ribono Shalom imolenu lo chasta. If you didn't have covet for us, al kedushas shimcha gibar lama lo tachus. Don't you have mercy and compassion on your own name? The Olea Konen Yirmiyah, in the 6th chapter of Yirmiyah, Bas Ami, Chigri Sak. Bas Ami is referring to Klal Yisrael. Wear the sackcloth, this palshi, be efer, and roll yourself in the dust, in the ashes. Evel yochid asilach mispei tamrurim. You should have a velus even on one yochid that was killed. Ki pisom yavo ashodei doleinu. Now the pasuk says, Olayich lo nema el oleinu. Right? It says Yavo Ashoded Oleinu. Now the Navi should have been talking to Klal Yisrael, so he should have said Olayich. What's Oleinu? El Oleinu kaviyachal olay v'olayich ba hashoded. Because Baruch is saying how his own honor was desecrated. Om Rabbi Yehuda Marav, my dechsiv. What does pasuk mean in Micha Beis? V'oshku gever ubeso v'ish v'nachlaso. So, in order to understand this pasuk, we'll have to wait until after the whole story of the Gemara. Then the Gemara is going to swing back and explain this pasuk. Ma'isa b'yadam echad shenasan eina beishis rabbo. Also a terrible story. So he had a teacher who was teaching him carpentry, and he had a lust for this man's wife. So the student had a lust for his teacher's wife, Shuli the Nagriab. So it wasn't his Rebbe that was teaching him Torah, but was teaching him Nagarut. Pamachas Hutzrach Lilvos. The teacher was hard-pressed for funds. He had to borrow money. Amalo, so his student said to him, Shagar, Ishtecha Etzli Valvena. I have money in my house. Send your wife over to me. Shiger Ishto Etzlo. So he sent his wife over. He anticipated that his wife would return immediately with the money. Visha Ima, and yet the Talmud stayed with this woman, Shloshes Yomi, and she didn't return. Kodam Uba Etzlo. Then after these 3 days, he comes to the Adon, to his teacher. Omalo, and his Rav says, Ishti sheshigarti loch. Heichani, where's my wife? Omalo, the Talmud says, Ani patartiya lialter. I sent her back to you immediately after I gave her the money. But Shamati, I heard from rumors, Shatinokos nisalu bava derech, that as she was going back to you, she had these relationships with different young males. Amalo ma'esa. Amalo, the Talmud says to him, you ought to listen to my advice, Girsha, divorce her. Amalo, but I can't divorce her because ksubasa maruv, I can't afford to pay her ksuba. In other words, I took upon myself at the time of the marriage a very expensive ksuba. Amalo, so the Talmud says, don't worry about it. You could divorce her, ani alvecha, I will lend you money to pay up the ksuba. The same law, ksubas. Amad zev girsha. So the husband, the teacher, divorced his wife. Halach zeh u'nesa. Now the Talmud takes over his wife. Kevin shigias mano. It was time to pay back the loan. And his teacher didn't have any money to pay back the loan. The Talmud says to him, I want you to be my servant in my house, and that'll be payment for the loan that I extended to you. Vayuhem, the Talmud and his new wife, Yoshev v'ochlev v'shosim, they would eat and drink and be merry. V'hu, and the Rav, ha'yomidu mashkalem, and he was serving them. V'yutmos noshos mi'enov, and the tears were flowing from his eyes. In all likelihood, he finally understood that this was a whole ploy. V'noflos b'koseim, and the tears fell into their into their cups. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't tolerate this. Alosa Shah, for this, shall we say, Kitrug Bashamayim, this Chasem Ksardin Shal Churban Abayis. Amri Leo, this Al Shtei Psilos B'ner Echad, that Shnei Anoshim Shabol Isha Achas, the overall Isur Eishes Isha. I don't know exactly where, there's a whole discussion here about where the Isur Eishes Ish was, and so forth and so on. And also there's a discussion here about whether or not the rabbis were aware of what was going on. They didn't make a macha. Anyway, this ends the Agadita. So on the one hand, when I got to this point in the Gemara, I sort of breathed a sigh of relief, because it was very hard for me, you know. Agadita is always hard for me, but certainly these Agaditas. So I figured, okay, now I can take a breather. Now the fun starts. So Mispal Tashem, you know, in Daf Yomi, some sugis you understand, some sugis you realize you need a month. You know, this is one of those latter sugis. Lokach minas sikrikon. So the sikrikon, you remember, forced the Jewish people to sell their fields. And now someone goes ahead and buys back Reuven's field that was absconded, that was taken away by the sikrikon, and buys it from the sikrikon. Now, it seems that the buyer, let's try names over here. It was originally Reuven's field. The Sikrikon took over Reuven's field. Shimon buys the field, and now he wants to pay off Reuven so that his sale, or purchase, I should say, is valid. But the only reason why Reuven would agree is only because he wants to get that field out of the hands of the Sikrikon. And therefore, the Mishnah paskins that the Mekach is boter. It was only like a fictitious sale when Shimon bought the field from Reuven. Reuven only sold it in order to get it back, not because he really wanted to forfeit the ownership of the field. Amar Rav, Lo Shanu. When does this Mishnah apply? That if the buyer, meaning Shimon, who bought the field from the Sikrikon, now goes ahead and buys it back from Reuven, it's batel, it's not a valid sale. Ella di Omar Lo. He said to him, I wish there were a little bit less pronouns here, but I think it's the original Reuven who's saying to Shimon, Lech hazeku kni, meaning that Reuven, after, in quotation marks, agreeing, which he really didn't agree, to sell the field to Shimon, did not get actively involved in the kinyan. Because you could be makne a karka in two ways. You could either tell the lokeach to go ahead and make the kinyan, which is called lech hazeku kni, or you could write a shtar and pass over the shtar mecher over to the buyer. So Rav says that in the case where he said lech hazeku kni, and he did not take an active role in the Maisa Kinyan, then we're going to assume that he didn't really have what's called Gemiras Das, and he didn't completely decide to be makna the field. He just would rather that the Lokeach, meaning that Shimon, would go down to the field and replace the Sikrikon. It's a lot easier for him, meaning Reuven, the original owner, to adjudicate and litigate against Shimon than it is against the Sikrikon. But if the Baal HaSoda, meaning Reuven, gets actively involved in the Hakna and the Maisa Kinyan B'shtar, then we assume that there was Gemiras Das, because if it didn't have Gemiras Das, then he wouldn't go through the entire effort of writing a shtar. Shmuel rejects Rav, the Omar. af bishtar nami lokan. The fact that the mocher, meaning the original Balabayas, Reuven, we called him, sold the field to Shimon with a shtar, that doesn't prove that he had Gemir Stas, unless Achiyitalo Achrayus, which means he adds to the shtar that in event that somebody comes along and says that there was a lien on this field that Shimon that you just bought from me, then I will back up that field and you'll be able to collect from me in lieu of the lien on the field. If he goes that far, says Shmuel, then we have clear-cut proof that he was Gomer B'dato, he had a full-fledged Gemir Stas to be Makna his son.